I hope that the sources will send. If they don't, I guess I'll have to read them on my own, or I can pass it around maybe. Let's see, you got it?
I got it, yeah.
Okay, so if you got it, then everyone got it. So, we're doing, in Parakman Vav, there's a very interesting reference. And it is to the concept, the Alter Rebbe says, there's an obligation to stand in front of someone that does a mitzvah. The Alter Rebbe says, the line ends with the kacha, it's on page Samach Vav. V'kochu b'chol nefesh mitzral, b'shas esek k'teira v'amitzvah, v'amitzvahs. This is how it is by every Jewish soul when they work in Torah and when they do mitzvahs. When he says this is how it is, he's referring to the concept of being a merkava for getlichkeit, being completely bottled to Hashem, that you're essentially a vehicle for Hashem to manifest in the world. And then he says, "V'chein chivu razal lokum v'lamed b'pnei kol isik mitzvah." That is why our sages obligated us to rise and to stand before everyone that performs a mitzvah. So the question of the shiur, it's an outstanding question, is why are we not standing right now? We're sitting here, we're having a shiur, we're doing a mitzvah, we're being isik in a mitzvah. Why are we not standing? So to that end, the first source that I would point to, and I didn't actually take a picture of this, but the first source that I would point to is there's a Gemara in Megillah, it's Daf Chav Aleph, and it says essentially that you don't need to stand while reading the Megillah, which is not the case by Torah. And so the discussion in the Gemara essentially, and what arises from the discussion, is that lichatchila, itaka would be the nice and proper thing to be standing whenever you learn Torah. And so much so that I think it's Rabbi Avo, but I could be wrong about that, but he says that if it weren't written in the pasuk that Hashem himself did it, then we wouldn't be able to say it, but Hashem himself stood by Matan Torah. So, a very interesting phenomenon, that everyone's standing by Matan Torah, even Hashem. However, the Maisa, it says, and it's also brought at the end of Masech HaSeitos, if I'm not mistaken, that from the generation of Rabban Gamliel and on, weakness set into the world, and we are not able to stand while we learn Torah. So, that's at least Torah, in a certain sense, taken care of. Almost like an anti-taken care of, but it's to say that it's not really possible to stand 24/7 while you're learning. That's essentially the answer for why we don't stand while we're learning Torah. But I think that there's something more to be gleaned, and especially because it isn't really something that enters our consciousness to stand in front of someone that does a mitzvah. Maybe it should be. The Alter Rebbe is saying that chivu razal lokum v'lamid b'pnei kol esek mitzvah. That the sages obligated us to stand before anyone that is working in a mitzvah. So I think one obvious thing to point out is the Alter Rebbe says esek mitzvah. Now, esek mitzvah is definitely a halachic construct. It is something that exists more than just in this phrase in Tanya. One, I think, notable example is that people that sell tefillin, they're involved in the sale of tefillin, they are being esek mitzvah to the extent that they can consider themselves disobligated, patur, from other mitzvahs. There's a more famous example of sukkah, that someone that's working in a mitzvah is patur from sukkah. It doesn't really stop the lavashers from putting up sukkahs all over the place. However, in theory, you can say that a person that's on saying they are halachically patur from sukkah because they're being isik in the mitzvah of putting tefillin on, not on sukkahs. So I guess it kind of cancels itself out. You can say with dollar minim, whatever it may be. They're being isik in a mitzvah. When you're being isik in one mitzvah, you're patur from another mitzvah, even though in theory you could accomplish both mitzvahs. This is something that's brought primarily in Hilchos Tefillin. So, isik mitzvah is not just tamaseh. Now, a person that's wearing tzitzis, for example, they're doing a mitzvah. They're doing a mitzvah, they're wearing tzitzis. The mitzvah is being accomplished. But it's not that they're being isik mitzvah. You put on the tzitzis in the morning, and then you go about your day. The mitzvah is being accomplished. We all have I presume we all have a bris milah. You can never not presume. But some medical reasons different people have. But we don't stand because we have a bris milah. David HaMelech, it says, Lamaseach al Shminis. I think it's a couple of Lavav to him, but it says that, well, what's the Shminis? So the Medrash says that he was in the bathhouse and he was thinking, oh yeah, I have no mitzvahs with me. But then he thought the milah that was given on the Shminis, and he became excited and happy. And so he sang a mizmar for the Shminis, for the milah that's given on, that's performed on the 8th day. So we always have the mitzvah of bris milah, but we're not always being isik in the mitzvah of bris milah. There's a difference between being isik in a mitzvah and actually doing a mitzvah. Now, it may seem semantical. I'm going to bring a few sources that the Chachamim have.
That's an ois. You're saying a bris is an ois.
It's an ois. It's a good thing. What is that?
Yeah. When you put on tzitzis, you're standing to make the bracha.
Oh, Alter Rebbe. Yeah. Now,
when the bris milah is being performed, there's only one person sitting. Everybody else is standing.
We're gonna get to the bris milah tzitzis. We're not going to get to. There's a concept of brachas b'chlal, but bris milah we are going to get to.
But there is a point in the day when you make a bracha on the tzitzis, then you are being basic.
Yeah, and Alter Rebbe, we're supposed to stand when you put on a talis.
You should know the IRS does the same thing. There's something called active income and passive income. If it's passive income where you invested in a property, when you invest in the property, you get a write-off. But when you're making your money every single year or month, you don't get to have the same type of write-off as if you made that investment. Why? Because you're passive. Unless you can prove, you're putting in at least a certain amount of hours a week. Mama's is always like,
when it
are you
comes,
Isaac or are you passive?
when it comes down to money, that's how you know it's a real nafkamina.
That's a real nafkamina.
Before that, it's theoretical. When it comes down to money, a real nafkamina. So a real nafkamina that we have is it active or is it passive? It may seem a little bit semantical. There is a point that I do want to drive home, and I'm going to try to build up this point a little bit more as we maybe look at some sources. So I did send some sources. Really, the source of this is Mishnah in Maseches Bikurim, and it's actually brought in the Rambam Lahalacha that there's a whole say there for bringing Bikurim. It's nicht samazeh, that you just bring it to the base of Mikdash quietly on your own. No, the whole community goes. They make pomp and affair. There's singing and there's dancing, and part of it is that all of the craftsmen come out and they stand before the delegation that's bringing the Bikurim. So this is part of it. So there's the Pirish Hamashnais, the Rambam, that is brought. And there's also the Pirish of the Bartanura. Now, it's not just me bringing these. The Rebbe actually, Al-Asar, does mention these two opinions. He contrasts them. He says that the Alter Rebbe seems to be siding with the Bartanura over the Rambam. Now, the Rambam over here comments, that the Ikar Vayos is that that it's not that the Bali Amanis need to be standing before the Tamid Chachamim, Aval Chiyavinu Le'ilu, Chiyavnu Le'ilu Lamed, the fee Shaneknosim him Kahal, Chvei Tzibur Shiny. So in general, there's a concept that you need to stand before Talmud Chacham, which really should be the ikar of this whole conversation, that this is already the Reisidic concept of standing for something holy, which is, it says, Mipnei Seva Takum, or Da'at Mipnei Zakin. And this is to say that you're supposed to stand for someone that is exceedingly old. We usually put that at 70. Older than 70 seems old enough.
You can stand up, you can sit back down.
Yeah, but that you knew that you're supposed to rise.
Yeah.
So, and also for a Talmud Chacham. Yeah. Now, there's actually a lot of halachic literature about standing in front of Talmud Chacham. When, who, how far are they? The Nasi and the Avbesin, and there's a lot of things going on. That's, I would say, maybe if you want to say there's an ikr. Now, Bali Yamani is when they're working in their craft, they don't need to stand for Talmidei Chachamim. So you could have a certain question. The Rambam says the ikr over here is not that they're standing for those that do a mitzvah, because if that would be the case, we would obligate them to stand even before a Talmud Chacham. What's the ikr? The ikr is, it's because it's a congregation. It's Kavod Tzibur. You have a whole congregation of people that are coming, they're a delegation, they're doing it together. For the Tzibur, we make them stand. That's the Rambam's take. The Bartanura takes a slightly different stance. And he says, Alpha Gav, the Ein, I'm swiping to the Bartanura, Alpha Gav, the Ein Bali Yamani is Chayav, and Lamed, Mnitamid Chachamim, and Mishal Shaizkim Melachtam, Kadesh Lo Yizbal Melachtam, even though they did not obligate craftsmen to stand before Tamid Chachamim when they're working on their work, so they shouldn't be bought from the work. Nevertheless, they were obligated to stand before those that bring Bikurim. Why? The Chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. It's precious, a mitzvah in its time. That is to say, Al Derech, what we were saying before, you can read Chaviva mitzvah b'shaita in different ways if you want to take along the lines of what we were saying before, that this is a mitzvah, it's the time that they're doing it. It's a time that you can't get away with doing it at another time. This is the time for Bikurim. Technically speaking, you have a large window. You have from Shavuos till Sukkot. But still, this is the time for each fruit in their own, each community in their own time, they have their own slot. So, because Chaviv Mitzvah Shaita. And he continues and he says, that is why also, by a Levaya, you stand in front of the bed that the dead person is on. And particularly, it's not for respect for the dead, per se, it is because of the respect for the people that are performing the mitzvah of accompanying the dead. You can make a kal v'chomer, that madach, that it's a mitzvah to stand before those that are carrying him, kal v'chomer, it's a mitzvah to stand before the dead, but it's particularly the mitzvah b'shaita. And the kal v'chomer kind of falls away when you appreciate the logic of the Alter Rebbe, which is that it's because they're doing a mitzvah, and this is a mitzvah that's from Hashem. And Hashem is invested in us when we're doing the mitzvah. And also, and also before those that carry the tinok to a bris milah. Now, there is a taz about this concept of carrying the bed for a dead person, and that's the next source. And the Rebbe actually didn't. I don't believe he brought this taz. I would need to check it again, but I don't remember him bringing it. I saw briefly there's a remark from the Rebbe on this, but the taz essentially he paskins like this Bartanura, and he says that you stand in front of you just stand in front of those that work with him. Shem Goyim Lechasid. Because they're Goyim Lechasadim. Because they are being Goyim Lechasadim. Now, being Goyim Lechasadim is Pashad a mitzvah deraisa. Just like Hashem is a Goyim Lechased, and it says about Moshe Rabbeinu, Beik Bereisi B'gai. Hashem buried Moshe Rabbeinu. So you see that it's Pashad, it's a mitzvah deraisa to bury dead people. The Rebbe has sichos about it, or what exactly is the nature of the mitzvah. But at the end of the day, at least it's a good claim to have it. This is how it is in the Torah. In the name of the Yerushalmi, I don't want to get into the whole side quest over here, but just to skip, the line starts with Talmud Chacham, Tav Ches. He says, "Mikol Mokim nearly Lulmoid the Bechol Dvar Mitzvah Sha'adam Heilichem Sasikva." It seems to me that you can learn that in every Dvar Mitzvah that a person is going and that they are doing, Yesh Lamid Lefanav. You should stand before him. This is also what is implied in the first parak of Kiddushin. Go and see how precious is a mitzvah in a time. That for the sake of a mitzvah b'shaita, he's referring to Bikurim. But for the sake of a mitzvah b'shaita, you stand before Bali Yomani, craftsmen stand before them, which is not the case with the Talmidei Chachamim. And the Taz says, Mashma Kol Mitzvah. The implication over there is it doesn't say Chaviva Bikurim b'shaita. The Taz says, he says Chaviva Mitzvah b'shaita. The mitzvah itself is what is precious. This would be a very good support for what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here. Now, it does happen to be. It's, I want to say, I mean, in a certain sense, the halachis of Kvura are kind of a meis mitzvah. It's at the end of your day. Not a lot of people in Smicha, they don't usually get to it, even though community rabbis, it might be one of the things that they deal with most. There's a little bit of a taboo about learning it. I don't know how founded it is, but there's rumors. So, but at the end of the day, it's kind of thrown into a taz in your day and Simon. And if you don't have it, it's not necessarily the thing that's going to come up. It's also brought in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, but it's in Simon Kuf Sadek Ches, and in Cheder we didn't get to Simon Kuf Sadek Ches.
Loads of stories where it comes up that a lot of people it comes up.
Yeah, I don't know.
Many stories, Meis Mitzvah. Many.
Yeah, but the idea that to stand before it, that the Taz learns from this for every mitzvah, is something that's kind of a side remark that isn't so well expounded. It's not so well expounded upon. Now, it does happen to be, just to take a pause because I want to get to bris, I have two pictures about bris. Give me a second. So, it does happen to be, when we pause and we think about it, definitely, at least in the Rambam's framework, there are a lot of mitzvahs that we do publicly, that there's a concept of standing by it. We said about Torah. Now, Torah, in regards to sitting and learning or by a share, or even learning on your own, we have the Gemara and Megillah that says, and not necessarily that you need to. At the end of the day, though, by Kriyas Torah, there's a minhag to stand. Not everyone does. Well, the concept exists. We are actually going to get to that as Hashem in the Mardechai, that's about the bris. But there's a notion of standing by Kriyas Torah.
Yeah, my mother used to stand Torah.
I don't know what it was like back in the day. I would imagine it was a more popular thing.
If she told my family, always used to stand by Kriyas Torah.
Yeah.
Even had I seen that, whatever.
Yeah.
Against that, whatever. She had a whole pilpul about it.
So it's a very big thing.
Yeah.
B'chlal, on Rosh Hashanah, we all stand by shofar, but we stand particularly by the tkiyas, the miyoshav. There's the miyoshav tkiyas, and then you also have the amidah moment tkiyas. Now, we stand by all of them, and the point happens to be more, I guess you could say, it's more emphasized that we're standing by the second ones, because usually everyone's sitting by Chazar Sashatz, but then everyone stands up for the tkiyas. Now really, it used to be Punk Parket. It used to be, the tkiyas, the miyoshav, sit, why not? When you're doing the tkiyas of Chazar Sashatz, you're middle of Shemona Esrei, and typically the way that it should be, in theory, is that everyone should be standing by Chazar Sashatz. Now, particularly by most of Rosh Hashanah, there's a reason to say to stand by Chazar Sashatz, even though it's brought b'chlal for Chazar Sashatz. Particularly because a person is actually, they fulfill their obligation of davening with the shots, particularly on Rosh Hashanah, of Musaf, because it's such a complicated davening that the Chachamim said, even though normally we're going to say, you shouldn't really be doing that, even if you know how to daven, over here they said, technically speaking, even if you know how to daven, you can still listen to the Shliach Tzibur. So when you're answering Amen, you're listening to the Shliach Tzibur, it's mamish like you're davening to a certain extent. So it's more of a reason to stand. Now, also they threw in so many piyotim over there, and the piyotim, are they really part of Shemona Esrei? Are they not really part of Shemona Esrei? There's even halachic literature about it. Is it considered a hefsek? And there were some people that they were anti-piyotim. That in Kan, it's not the reason why we're here, but ultimately, Tkiyas D'Me'omid is a remnant of that idea. Taka, the fact that we call it D'Me'omid, we should be standing by Chazar Sashas. There is that Indian that exists.
We don't talk till after the complete end of Tkiyas. That's after.
So that's because really the mitzvah of Tkiyas, the Chachamim wanted to. There's a lot of complications about how you're supposed to blow the shofar. Ultimately, they wanted it to be that in Shemar Esrei is the niglah'dike way of doing it. But they also wanted it to be that you should be able to just fulfill the obligation and not need to be sweating about it, because different communities had different minhagim about how you actually put. We would technically speaking be yosef. If a person comes late to shul, technically they could be yosef with just tzkiyas in Shemar Esrei. But not every community had that amount of tzkiyas. Some communities did only tashat by the first one, and then tashat by the second one, and tashat tarat. So you wouldn't be able to fulfill your full obligation. So at the end of the day, we do one full set before, you're good. Technically speaking, you're yotze. But the niglah'dike way of being yotze is taken middle chazar sashat. That's the way that it should be.
What's the extra 34?
I confused the satan.
Confuses me.
Yeah. No, really, like, I've had to put forward my personal theories, because there was that one guy and he thought that the Baal Tekiah didn't blow properly. So in order to get rid of the sickness, he said, 30 more. But that's more of a joke than something serious. No, but they'll call it to confuse the satan. So at the end of the day, we have this idea that you should be standing. These are communal mitzvahs. We should be standing. Now, it was pointed out, bris. Bris is a very chashuv mitzvah, and we stand. Now, there's a Mordechai. The Mordechai is, I would say, the source, the primary source of this. And he says, the Ram, which I presume, I'm not a Baki in the Mordechai, but I presume is referring to the Ram of Rothenburg, who was the teacher of the Mordechai, but I could be very mistaken about that. But anyhow, so he would, Emid B'shas Kristatero. This one is the only one that's not a screenshot. I have to take out a Gashmi Stick Gemara. So I didn't know how to find the Mordechai easily on one of the apps. So Emid B'shas Kristatero V'shas Shemolin Hatirik. He would stand at the time of Kriyas and at the time that they would circumcise a child. The Ayam in a pasuk, and he would bring a proof from the pasuk that it says Vayamid kol ha'amim b'vris, that the whole nation stood by the covenant. V'rayim in a Talmud, and there's also proof from the Gemara. The Amar Parak Rabbi Elazar de Milah, that it says in the Parak Rabbi Elazar de Milah, Hamol Imer al Hamilah, that the person that does the bris makes the bracha al Hamilah. We do this nowadays also. But Imdim Sham Imrim Kishem Shenichnas Lebris Chulu. That just as you went into the bris, can you the Sir L'Chubal Maisim David? There's Shiach Nisu, there's different Gersais, but at the end of the day, this is something that we still practice. Usually we say Kshem Shenichnas Lebris, we say after the father makes a bracha Lachnisa B'Bris Shel Avraham Avinu. But at the end of the day, it says in the Gemara, paragraph of the Milah, that the mol makes the bracha, and then the people there say it. Now the point is that it doesn't say v'ha'am says, it says v'ha'imdim sham. Those that are standing there. So you see from the Gemara, they were standing there. Now, really, if you take the Gemara at face value, you could just take it with the Mishnah and Bikurim, and you could just take it that they were standing because you stand by a mitzvah b'shaita, right? Chavim mitzvah b'shaita, someone's being isik in a mitzvah actively right now, so you're going to stand in front of the mitzvah. However, the Maram actually took a different twist, and this is more preserved directly in Shulchan Aruch, which is the next picture. The Ramal brings this. He says, "Yesh Emrim shekol ha'am she'eim eisal milah yamdu," that all of the people that are by the milah they should stand. Shenamar v'yamid amma b'vris, that the people stood by the covenant. Michlal, why Torah is also called the bris is because a bris milah, there's 13 covenants that are made with it, and the Rambam has a list of them. And Torah, there are 3 covenants that are made with it. Both of them are we made covenants with Hashem over them. So, but over here we're in Hilchas Milah, and so the Ramah brings it from the Mordechai and from the Kolbai and from Rabbeinu Yocham, etc. But essentially, he preserves over here the reason of Avayam Kolam B'Vris, that respect for the covenant is enough of a reason to stand. He doesn't bring the Gemara and Rabbi Elazar de Milah. Now, that kind of implies, says the Rebbe, that the Ramah isn't saying to stand for this reason particularly. That is to say, he's not saying to stand for the fact that he's being oisik in a mitzvah and mitzvah shaita, and because you're on a cover for getlachait, that's why you're supposed to stand. What he says is that you're supposed to stand because of v'yamid kol ha'am b'vris, which is a different reason. It's still a good reason, but a different reason nonetheless. Now that we've arrived over here, I want to look at everything that we've discussed so far, and I want to think about how it applies and pertains to what the Alter Rebbe, the point that the Alter Rebbe is trying to make over here in Tanya. I really wanted to kind of bring home the point that there is this vestige that exists in halacha of taka standing by a mitzvah, and I think that ultimately, if I had to give a primary reason for why we might not be consciously aware of this as a communal conscious, it's not the kind of thing that necessarily comes up, but it is the kind of thing. It is the kind of thing that, at the end of the day, we have in so many different places that we might not even be thinking about it. notwithstanding that by a bris milah you have a different reason in Shulchan Aruch, but we are still standing, and you still have that Gemara that says over there. Bikurim is not really something that we do, but you have the notion of standing by Chazar Sashas. If you look around in a shul, you'll see a couple of people standing by Chazar Sashas. If you look around by Kriyas Torah, you'll see some people standing by Kriyas Torah. And by bris milah, we stand in Mechlal. I noticed by Pidyon Ben recently that people were standing, and this is the kind of thing that people will stand. And I think one of the prime examples of this notion of respect for the message or the entity that's being carried over is by every event that they read a letter of the Rebbe, they say, "Please rise." You're reading a letter of the Rebbe, you're carrying forward the Rebbe's words, you stand in respect for the Rebbe. When a person is reading a letter of the Rebbe, that they're reading the Torah of the Rebbe, and the inside of the Rebbe, and so to that end, you're standing out of respect for what's being carried forward. Now, as for why we don't stand necessarily by every mitzvah, firstly, you have the idea that you have a Maseches Megillah. Torah, if you would say, is the ultimate expression of this. When a person learns Torah, we said you have the greatest chibuk, the greatest connection to Hashem. To explain in Parakeh, we mentioned briefly last time, that you have the greatest connection to Hashem. And Torah itself, it says in Maseches Megillah, that from when Rabban Gamliel passed on, this idea was the weakness set into the world. We're not able to do it the way that we used to. The mitzvah of Bikurim, the minhagim of Bikurim, go back seemingly before Rabban Gamliel. It seems to be that this idea, this notion, was a notion that existed before. And over time, it got weaker. We still have a lot of vestiges. If we look around and we know where to look. I think it's important to note, an interesting chakira that you can have, is that particularly it says explicitly that Megillah, which is a kind of Talmud Torah, which is something that all the Acharayim ask about, it says that you're Mevatel Talmud Torah from Mikra Megillah, or how are you Mevatel Talmud Torah from Mikra Megillah? It is Talmud Torah itself. And they say maybe it's because it's Derabanan, maybe because you're not going into the Emek of the Inyan, you're just reading it in a shetimistic way, maybe because even if you're not paying attention, you're still Yetzah. There's different answers that people give. And at the end of the day, you do have explicitly listed a mitzvah b'shaita, Mikra Megillah, and still you don't need to stand by it. I think that the reason, when you look at what the Alter Rebbe is discussing, is a little bit obvious. That Mikra Megillah, what's the Vitzivanu? Hashem commanded us to do a mitzvah. Make a bracha. Vitzivanu. What's the Vitzivanu? The Vitzivanu is that the Chachamim obligated us. We're obligated to listen to the Chachamim. The Chachamim said that we should be doing the mitzvah. So, does this function closer to tzitzis? Or does it function closer to a bris milah? Or does it function closer to bikurim? The will of the Chachamim being fulfilled is a constant that is in the universe. It's not that you need to do something and that actively, as you're participating in it, you're causing the will of the Chachamim to be fulfilled. There is a standing in the universe that isn't to be violated, which is you shouldn't turn away from what the Chachamim are telling you to do. By you not turning away from what the Chachamim are telling you to do, you're not actively participating in a mitzvah. You're causing that there shouldn't be something against the will of the Chachamim in the universe. It's a little bit of a twist, but this is the logic that goes into it, I think. Ultimately, the kunz over here, I think what the Alter was trying to bring out, and this is, I would say, the contrast between the Aveda that's going from Parak Memhein on and the Aveda that we had before that, is that before we're talking about making a dir b'tachteinu more particularly, we're talking about how you bring it into the world, you bring it into yourself, that's part of the world, and you also bring it into the chayfetz of the mitzvah, you bring it into your neshama. But over here, we're talking about something deeper. I don't know, deeper. You can look at it however you want to. On the one hand, there's transforming the world. On the other hand, there's simply the presence of Hashem down here. And that's really what Parak Memhein onward is about, in a very practical sense. And that's what we're focusing on over here, the idea of a merkava. The idea of a merkava is not that you're making your body into a chivas of mitzvah, because if that would be the case, you would need to stand up every time that you see a pair of tzitzis, every time that you see a pair of tefillin, every time that you see a sefer, you would need to stand up in reverence. It's not reverence for the holiness, it's not reverence for the dir b'tachtenim, it's reverence for the presence of Hashem that is actively here. And we do still see vestiges of this, notwithstanding the point that we have our lives and we go about our lives, and it's hard to stand up. The Bali Yamanis, they weren't obligated to stand up until Milei Chachamim, notwithstanding that it is a mitzvah seder, it's a pasha to stand up. You see the idea that we're not going to make people go out of their way. And Taka, there's a Mishnah that by Rabban Gamliel, Chalishas descended into the world. And so if by Torah, Maduch by Torah, that it's supposed to be, and you have psukim to back it up, etc., etc., and Torah is the highest form of connection to Hashem, the highest form of bringing down that you're discussing a svara. When we're discussing a svara right now, it's Pashat Hashem's svara. Assuming that I'm not crazy, but assuming that the gist of the shiur is taka going, it's Hashem's svara. At least it's a. Anyway, I don't want to get into that. And then you always have it's a havamina and Torah still Torah.
It says by tefillin you're supposed to. Alter Rebbe says you sit down when you make the bracha.
By the shalyad.
Why do we stand?
there's a machlekes b'chlal. Is it better to stand for the bracha, or is it better to stand for the bracha, or so machlekes Ashkenazim Sfardim? Is it better to stand for the bracha or to sit for putting on the shal yad, which is a kabbalistic inyan to be sitting? That's the concept.
It's Alter Rebbe is right that you should sit, but ultimately our minhag is to stand.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I'm just trying
No,
to
he doesn't write in the Siddur. He writes to sit in
Yeah,
the
it's
Shulchan
just-
Aruch. In the Shulchan Aruch, he's a little bit inconclusive. The Rebbe says that the widespread minhag is to stand, and you can do it that way.
Why not do both? I mean, it doesn't sound so hard. You say this, sit down, say the bracha, and stand up.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, we do engage ourselves in other areas of life.
The whole thing is reason. You don't want to make a hefsek. You want to put on the yad to the resh as fast as possible. So by doing that, it'll take a little bit longer. No, that's how.
However you want to slice it. I'm sure that all of the halachists have a lot of conversation about how exactly is the best way to do and to fulfill and to perform. I mean, I would say the real question that I would ask is why not do it by Rabbeinu Tam's? Rabbeinu Tam's, you're not making a bracha, so seemingly the Chulei almost just sit. But I'm not here to discuss Hilchos Tefillin. It's a good point. It's a valid point to be making. B'chlal, with brachas, there's a little bit of a back and forth. Is it better to stand or better to sit? And it depends on the kind of bracha. There's a lot of imik to be plunged over here. But at the end of the day, the point over here that I want to bring out is it's Isik in mitzvah. When you're being Isik in a mitzvah, you are literally manifesting the Eibishter. You're literally manifesting the Eibishter. Now, whether or not we actively stand every time that it happens, it could be because of the chalishas that we have. But we should at least appreciate kal v'chomer when we do a mitzvah. There's a concept that it says, I believe it's brought in the Shlah, I could be mistaken, a concept that's brought in the Shlah, that a kal v'chomer, that if you see someone that's being Isik in a mitzvah and you need to stand before that, kal v'chomer, that you should be standing when you do a mitzvah. The Arizal, the idea we give tzedakah by Baruch David, is that we're standing by Baruch David. I'm not sure if the chicken came before the egg or the egg came before the chicken. Do you give tzedakah dafka by Baruch David because you're standing by Baruch David and you need to be standing when you do a mitzvah, so give over there? Or do you say that the whole reason why we're standing by Baruch David is to give tzedakah, that we need to be standing when we give tzedakah. We're giving tzedakah, it's mitzvah b'shaita, and you're actively giving a mitzvah. You're doing the mitzvah. You're manifesting the Eibishter when you're giving tzedakah. And this is really the concept. Whether or not it comes up in every aspect in halacha, there's definitely vestiges. You look around and you see. You go to a bris milah and you see. You go to Kriyas Torah at least by Oz Yasher and by Aseres Dibros and everyone is standing. And different things that we could look around and appreciate, at least the vestiges that, when we do a mitzvah, we're talking manifesting the Eibishter, and we stand out of reverence for the fact that the Eibishter is with us. So, l'chaim.
You see on Purim when